Hey guys, tonight we wander back into a world where childhood isn't soft, pastel-coloured, or cushioned with participation trophies. Instead, you find yourself stepping, barefoot usually, into a medieval village where the sky smells faintly of wood smoke, the roofs lean like tired shoulders, and everyone already expects you to behave. Well, perfectly. You're tiny, but apparently you're also supposed to know exactly where to stand, when to speak, and how not to embarrass the household. And yes, you probably won't survive this with your sanity intact, but that's part of the charm of tonight's little time travel misadventure. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching this while winding down for the night, let me know your location and your local time in the comments, because I love seeing where everyone's falling asleep from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive not as a modern adult with tax responsibilities, but as a very small human who, in medieval society, is not exactly treated like a kid. Childhood is short, expectations are tall, and you're already learning rules before you learn full sentences. You toddle across a packed dirt floor, and grown-ups exchange amused, worried, or mildly judgmental glances, depending on whether you're walking toward the hearth, bad, the dog, sometimes worse, or the family's only decent wooden bowl, the worst. One mainstream fact historians often bring up is that medieval childhood was less about exploring feelings, and more about training you for adulthood as quickly as possible. So the moment you can walk, someone is basically handing you a chore list disguised as helping. You're expected to watch, imitate, and, above all, not ruin anything. Tools are expensive, food is precious, linen is a luxury, and you're a tiny chaos gremlin who could spill, stain, or break any of those things with one well-timed wiggle. And yet, despite the seriousness layered over your little head, there's something oddly cozy about the ritual of it all. Adults don't give you a whole speech explaining your place in the household. They just assume you'll absorb it like smoke in wool. Your day begins with a rule so simple yet so suffocating. Don't get in the way. The house may be small, sometimes one room for everyone, but somehow there are exactly 1 million places where you're not supposed to stand. Near the boiling pot? No. Near father's boots? Also no. Near mother's spindle? Especially no, unless you want to learn why everyone is afraid of tangling fine thread. There's even a quirky tidbit many people don't realise. Some households believed babies and toddlers could accidentally attract spirits if they wandered too far from the hearth or the family mat. So, yes, you're essentially under supernatural house arrest. Adults will scoot you back into the safe circle like a loose chicken. But maybe the strangest rule hits you early. You are not the star of the home. Today's culture loves celebrating children, posting their drawings, applauding their snack choices. Medieval people? They like you, sure, but adoration isn't really the vibe. You're more like a young apprentice in training whose existence must be quietly useful. Historians still argue whether medieval parents were affectionate in the modern sense, but there's no doubt they expected quick maturity. Adults toss around little commands with the same casual tone you use to remind yourself to buy milk. Stand straight, quiet, hands still, no wandering, give that back, no, the other corner, stop eating hay. You're constantly adjusting your posture and resting your hands exactly where they say. And honestly, you're trying, but your tiny body is 90% impulsive movement, and your brain is a bowl of porridge that hasn't quite set. One of the earliest rules you learn is bizarrely specific. Don't stare at adults. Apparently eye contact is a little too bold, too assertive, especially for someone who can't reach the table. You're meant to look respectful, not laser-focused like a suspicious goose. So you learn the subtle art of gazing politely downward, which would be a great yoga pose today. And then there's the clothing rule. Your garments aren't cute, they're practical and occasionally itchy. They're mini versions of adult outfits, often hand-me-downs that were hand-me-downs even before that. There's no bright-coloured toddler line, no animal prints, no pyjamas with moons. Your clothes signal your family's place in society, and, by extension, your expected behaviour. If your shirt is stiff, it's not to torture you, it's to teach posture. If your belt is slightly too tight, it's training you to stay neat and contained instead of sprawling like a loose marionette. You're beginning to understand something important. Every rule is a tiny rehearsal for adulthood. Even the shoes you don't get to wear yet symbolize responsibility. Bare feet mean you're free to toddle around without being trusted to go anywhere important. Shoes? Shoes are for bigger kids who might run errands, and you are decidedly not running errands, not when you can barely run without wobbling into the goat. Sometimes adults test you without warning. They'll say, "Bring me that," pointing to an object halfway across the room. This is less about the object and more about checking whether you've absorbed the unwritten rule. You move when they speak. You shuffle over, drag the item back, and adults nod with the solemn approval of courtroom judges. Meanwhile, there's a constant scholarly debate over exactly how independent medieval toddlers really were. Some evidence suggests you were allowed to roam around the household and yard with surprising freedom. Other sources insist adults hovered closely to prevent fatal child-meets-well accidents. But either way, everyone agrees on one thing. You were expected to behave with more composure than your age naturally allowed. Still, there are small joys. Sometimes your job is simply to sit near the hearth and not fall in. Sometimes you're allowed to hold a spoon or a scrap of wool. Tiny, dignified responsibilities that make you feel approximately 6 feet tall. And sometimes an adult ruffles your hair or laughs when you mimic them, which feels like a parade thrown just for you. But mostly, the rules begin stacking up like uneven blocks. Don't cry too loudly. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch what isn't yours. Don't question anything. And yet, you're learning. Slowly. Clumsily. And the village watches this little creature, this small person who's already expected to master quietness, neatness, obedience, and usefulness, long before you understand why the moon changes shape. You're growing into the space medieval society carved for you, rule by rule, expectation by expectation, each one shaping your days with a rhythm that will follow you into youth and adulthood. You shuffle from the packed dirt floor toward the long, creaking table, the household heart, the daily stage, and the birthplace of roughly half the rules you're expected to memorize. You can feel the meal before you smell it, the faint warmth of barley broth, the sharp hint of onion, maybe even the ghost of last night's garlic if your parents were feeling extravagant. But don't let the cozy scene fool you. This is not the place to express excitement. In medieval childhood, mealtime is less family bonding moment and more exercise in extreme silence. You don't sit down, you perch, quietly, like a sparrow trying not to disturb the wind. A mainstream fact modern listeners might find surprising. Children were expected to be nearly invisible at the table, not because adults disliked your company, but because mealtime was a ritual moment of order, food was precious, conversation was adult territory, and spills were catastrophic events on par with losing the family cow. This is the one time of day when everyone shares the same limited resources, so you must follow the choreography perfectly. You fold your hands in your lap, which is difficult because they don't like being folded. Medieval children, much like you right now, tend to wiggle. Your hands want to drum. They want to explore the glimmering wooden grain of the table. They want to poke the dog who's waiting under the bench like a furry vacuum. But no, the rule is simple, terrifying, and absolute. Do not touch the table until you are told. You swallow your impatience and remind yourself not to stare directly at the food. Looking too eager is considered rude. Looking bored is also rude. Looking anywhere in particular, for too long is, honestly, it depends on how tired your parents are today. You try to adopt a generic, respectful expression. Somewhere between, "I am grateful for this meal," and "I may or may not be asleep right now." And here's where the first quirky tidbit sneaks in. Some medieval households believed that spilling salt, or even touching it without permission, could attract misfortune or demons. Salt was expensive, powerful, symbolic, and weirdly dramatic. So if you're seated anywhere near the salt cellar, congratulations. You now have the responsibility equivalent to holding the nuclear codes. Don't. Breathe. On it. Your parents settle into their places, and the food is finally served in the large communal bowl. There are no personalized plates, no neat little portion sizes. You lean in slightly, ready to dip a spoon, and immediately get the gentle but firm hand on your wrist. The rule you forgot. Adults begin first. Always. You wait as the grown-ups take their scoops, talking quietly about things you don't understand. Harvests, neighbours, wheat prices, someone's cousin's scandal involving a goat, which is delivered in hushed tones that make it sound very dramatic. You listen because you have nothing else to do. Silence is your role. Your presence is an apprenticeship in watching without interrupting. Historians still argue whether children ate the same food as adults or received simplified versions, but there's no doubt that whatever ends up in your bowl is deeply appreciated. Food scarcity is a reality. Waste is practically a sin. And medieval etiquette manuals, yes, they had those, repeatedly warn children not to take the best pieces. You aim for the broth, not the chunk of meat. That chunk is probably reserved for father, the guest, or anyone who looks like they might win in an arm wrestling contest. Finally, you get your chance. You dip your spoon slowly, carefully, with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. You lift it to your mouth, blow gently so you don't scorch your tongue, and take a sip. It's good. Really good. Which means you must not show it. No slurping, no sighing, no bouncing in your seat like a medieval frog. You take in the warmth quietly, politely, as if your taste buds are also bound by social rules. And yes, you're not allowed to talk while eating, not even a little. Medieval etiquette is clear. Children must chew in monk-like silence. The only exception is if an adult directly asks you a question, and even then the correct answer is short, soft, and respectful. Halfway through this meal, you make your first mistake. You reach for bread before the adult next to you finishes with it. It's instinctive. Hunger is loud, and your brain is still developing impulse control, but the rule is, never reach across the table. Your hand freezes in the air and you slowly retreat it like a small embarrassed turtle. Under the table, the dog nudges your leg with hopeful optimism. He knows you're the weakest link in the chain. You're the one most likely to accidentally drop a crumb. But another rule looms. Do not feed the animals during meals. That's how shortages begin. That's how bad habits form. That's how dogs start thinking they're the royal family. So you ignore his soulful gaze and carry on. One moment, the conversation shifts to something intriguing. Someone mentions a travelling peddler passing through town. Your ears perk up. You want to ask what he sells, what he looks like, whether he has shiny trinkets. But a voice in your head repeats the mantra. This is not the time to ask questions. Instead, you sit quietly and practice the subtle art of listening without reacting. Medieval children were expected to absorb adult knowledge like sponges, but silently, like ninjas of observation. At last, the final rule arrives. Leave the table as gracefully as you entered. No leaping from your seat. No loud scraping of the bench. You place your spoon neatly by the bowl, slide off the bench with theatrical delicacy, and step away as if drifting out of a royal ceremony. Another scholarly debate lingers here. Some historians think kids were dismissed early so adults could talk freely. Others argue children stayed for the whole ritual. In your case, you're quietly shooed toward the hearth, freeing the adults to switch from family-friendly topics to the real gossip, wars, taxes, and that goat story you still want to hear the ending of. As you settle onto the floor, you realize something essential. Medieval mealtime isn't just eating, it's training. Training to be patient, training to observe, training to join a rhythm older than you, steadier than hunger, and far stricter than any modern dinner table you've known. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, hopefully without reaching for the bread too early. You don't get much time to recover from the ordeal of behaving perfectly at the table. Before your stomach has fully settled, you're already being directed toward the next inevitability of medieval childhood: work. Not work in the modern sense, where adults say things like chores build character, while quietly ignoring their own laundry pile. No, here, work is how the household survives. Your tiny hands may not be strong, but they are available, and that alone qualifies you for employment. You drag your feet toward the door, and the moment you step outside, the cool air hits your face like a reminder. There is always something to do, and you, small as you are part of the machine that keeps this world turning. A mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Medieval children were expected to take on real labour shockingly early, sometimes as young as 3 or 4. Not dangerous tasks, usually, but meaningful ones. Today you might get, put these toys away, but back then it's more like, go gather firewood, help with livestock, carry water, chase the geese out of the garden, and try not to fall into the stream this time. You're led to a pile of firewood that looks suspiciously larger than you remember. Your job? Pick up sticks, dry ones, preferably, though at your age everything looks equally stick-like. You grab what you can, which ends up being a bundle about the size of a disgruntled hedgehog. It's fine. Every bit helps, and if you drop a few pieces along the way, well, that's just gravity submitting its job review. Around you, the household hums with its usual morning rhythm. Adults are already knee-deep in grown-up responsibilities, mending tools, stirring the pot that will eventually become lunch, tending to livestock, checking the garden for any signs that rabbits have formed an organised political resistance. And you're learning the two most important rules underlying every medieval chore. 1. Do what you can. 2. Do not make more work for anyone else. You cling to those rules because you've experienced the consequences of violating them. Like the time you tried to help by sweeping, which somehow resulted in a dirt avalanche worthy of a geological study. Or last week, when your attempt to milk the goat ended in a high-pitched bleat and milk on the ceiling. Adults still talk about that with the hushed reverence normally reserved for battle stories. But chores today are safer. Your mother hands you a woven basket and instructs you to pick up any eggs the hens have grudgingly produced. This task requires stealth, patience, and an understanding of territorial poultry. You approach the coop like a soldier in a heroic saga, if heroic sagas involved feathered creatures who look at you as if you owe them rent. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some medieval people believed hens laid better eggs if the household children behaved well. Whether it was superstition, desperate optimism, or just a parent's clever attempt to prevent chaos, you're not sure. Still, you approach respectfully. You reach under a warm hen, grab an egg, and whisper a tiny apology because the bird is glaring daggers at you. As you walk away, carefully balancing the basket, you feel absurdly proud. This is real work that matters. Then comes the water chore. The bucket is heavy, even empty, but the stream isn't far. You toddle toward it under the illusion that you are deeply capable, a heroic water fetcher of legend. But then reality intervenes. The bucket is genuinely too big for your hands, and you slosh half the water onto your tunic. Twice. Historians still argue whether children in small villages had structured chore lists or simply followed adults like helpful shadows. Some records suggest kids were assigned tasks, others show them learning by imitation. In your case, you do a bit of both. You copy what older kids do and you complete whatever missions adults throw at you like mini-quests. As the morning warms, the work keeps shifting. You gather herbs, you shake crumbs out of blankets, you help, sweep the yard, which essentially means moving dirt from one location to another in a ceremonial fashion. You shoo chickens from the doorway with all the authority of a confused broomstick. Then someone decides you are trustworthy enough to help with the laundry. You hold the linen as your mother beats it against a wooden plank with the enthusiasm of someone releasing 3 generations worth of frustration. You're splashed repeatedly, but it's fine. You're already damp from the water bucket incident. At this point, you're basically a walking sponge. Between chores, older children occasionally swoop in to teach you things, which is medieval kid speak for bossing you around with the confidence of someone who's been alive for a whopping 8 years. They show you how to gather kindling more efficiently, how to avoid the aggressive rooster. You're told to give him a wide berth, which is ironic because you also give him deep emotional significance, and how to stack firewood so it doesn't collapse like a sad medieval Jenga tower. Somewhere in the distance, church bells ring, marking the hour. They remind you that your day is structured around cycles you don't fully understand, but you follow them anyway. Bells mean transition. Bells mean routine. And for you, they mean keep working. You're tired. But medieval children weren't expected to voice exhaustion. Instead, you keep going until an adult finally waves you inside. You trudge back into the house, hands dirty, clothes dusty, hair containing at least 2 twigs, and possibly 1 confused insect. But here's the surprising part. Even with all the rules, the expectations, the tiny responsibilities stacked like pebbles on your shoulders, you feel a small sense of belonging. You're part of something. Every stick you gather makes the fire burn a little longer. Every egg you collect feeds the family. Every task, though small, secures your place in the rhythm of the home. You settle onto a low stool, catching your breath, feeling the warmth of the hearth again. Your day of work isn't over. It's never really over. But for a moment you enjoy the quiet satisfaction of knowing you survived the morning's chores without spilling anything explosive or angering the rooster. That's a win in medieval childhood. You're barely done catching your breath when the next rule of medieval childhood drifts over you like a shadow. You do not speak first. Not to adults. Not to older kids. Not even to the neighbour's goat, technically, though the goat doesn't seem to follow these rules and will happily scream at you whenever it wants. In your small world, hierarchy is everything. Adults sit at the top, older children hover somewhere in the middle, and you, being small, wiggly, and occasionally sticky, occupy the lowest rung. So when grown-ups talk, you listen. When older children talk, you also listen. When someone asks you a question, you answer softly and politely. When no one asks you anything, you say nothing at all. It sounds harsh, but the truth is, medieval society runs on a kind of quiet choreography. Everyone knows their place, and communication is careful, measured, and purposeful. A mainstream historical fact reinforces this. Medieval etiquette manuals explicitly warn children never to initiate conversation with adults unless addressed first. Speaking out of turn wasn't just considered rude, it was seen as presumptuous, a sign of poor upbringing, or even an omen that you'd become the kind of adult who doesn't follow rules. And no one wanted that. So when you wander into the yard and see two grown men discussing something serious, grain, taxes, or the ever-mysterious goat scandal, you keep your distance. Not too far, though. You need to look attentive, not terrified. You aim for the safe zone, close enough to show respect, far enough to avoid being told to stand elsewhere. You hover there like a small, polite cloud waiting. You overhear phrases you don't fully understand, delivered with adult solemnity. Something about a travelling merchant. Something about the price of wool. Something about a rumour that a neighbouring village is hosting a fair which makes your ears perk up. But no, you don't ask. You don't even smile too visibly. Smiling can look like an invitation for conversation, and you're not trying to cause trouble today. One of the men glances your way, and your body reacts like you've been struck by lightning. You straighten your back, you lower your eyes, you assume the posture of a respectful miniature adult, and then, nothing. He returns to his conversation. You stand there like a well-trained statue, internally screaming, "Please let this end soon so I can blink naturally again." A quirky tidbit slips into your memory. In some regions, children were trained to bow not only to lords and clergy, but also to anyone older, taller, or just slightly more important at the moment. People bowed constantly. Bowing was basically medieval punctuation. You get used to it, but your neck is living through its own workout routine. Eventually the adults finish talking and walk away. You exhale. You survived another round of the silent, invisible dance that defines your childhood. Inside the house, things are only slightly easier. You're allowed to speak to your parents, but even then you must wait for an opening. You can't just burst into the room with your burning questions like, "Where do rainbows come from?" Or, "Why does the rooster hate me specifically?" You need to wait until an adult is seated, calm, and not actively stirring, chopping, repairing, or disciplining something. You stand by your mother as she sorts herbs, waiting for a natural pause. She doesn't pause for a while, so you wait longer. And longer. Your question marinates in your brain until it's overcooked. Historians still argue whether children internalize these silence rules naturally, or whether adults had to enforce them often. Some records show children were quite chatty at home. Others depict households that demanded near-monastic quiet. In your case, the rules are clear enough. Talk softly, and only when invited. Finally, your mother looks up at you. You deliver your question in a hushed, careful voice. She answers quickly, something practical, something simple, and you nod, satisfied. Question accomplished, conversation complete, returning to silence. Then comes the real challenge. Older children. Older children wield strange and unpredictable power. They're not adults, but they're close enough to adulthood to have absorbed half the rules and invented the other half. They can speak to you without permission. They can interrupt your thoughts like they're conducting an orchestra, and they can ask you questions that feel like tests you never studied for. Why are you standing there? Who told you you could sit? What are you holding? Did you wash your hands? Why do you look like that? You have no answers, so you fall back on medieval child survival technique No. 7. Shrug politely. A good shrug can solve many crises, but older children also teach you things. They show you how to stand in a doorway so you're not blocking it. They remind you where it's acceptable to sit on stools and where it's not, absolutely everywhere else. They even demonstrate how to wait for adults by leaning against a wall without looking bored, an art form requiring years of practice. By noon, you've spent more time silently observing adults than actually speaking, and honestly, you're not bad at it. You've learned to listen for tone, to watch posture, to anticipate when someone might want help or when someone clearly wants space. There's something strangely comforting in this structured quiet. It gives you a sense of place, like you're part of a ritual older than memory. You're learning to read the world without words, to interpret a raised eyebrow as a full sentence, to understand a pointed finger as a paragraph. It's communication, but distilled. Less noise, more meaning. Still, you sometimes wish you could talk freely, ask all the questions bubbling in your mind, talk about the way the sunlight makes the dust look like floating gold. Ask why the rooster acts like he pays rent. Wonder out loud where the fairies really hide in tree roots. But for now, you're a medieval child, and silence is the rule that shapes you. You carry it gently, like an invisible tool, learning when to use it and when to break it. Rarely, carefully, and only in the presence of someone you trust. Because the truth is, medieval childhood isn't mute, it's measured. And you're becoming fluent in a language spoken mostly through quiet. You don't get to choose your clothes, not even a little. And as a medieval child, you quickly learn that what you wear isn't just fabric. It's a rule book stitched directly onto your skin. Every tunic, every belt, every little cord dangling from your waist has a purpose, or more accurately has lesson attached to it. Your garments aren't designed for comfort, they're designed for training. This morning your mother pulls out your outfit with the same seriousness someone today might use when selecting a witness protection disguise. A small linen shirt, coarse, scratchy, and definitely not cut for a body that wants to run, climb, or breathe freely. A woolen tunic that smells faintly of smoke, because everything smells faintly of smoke, and a belt that somehow manages to be both too long and too tight. A mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Medieval children weren't dressed like kids, they were dressed like short adults. Clothing wasn't meant to be cute, it was meant to reflect your family's status, enforce modesty, and prepare you for the posture expected of a well-behaved human. Even toddlers wore simplified versions of adult garments, which meant no stretchy waistbands, no animal prints, and definitely no soft pajamas with smiling moons. When your mother lifts the tunic over your head, your arms pop out unevenly, and for a moment you look like a confused turnip. She straightens the fabric with automatic swipes, smoothing wrinkles that will reappear within minutes. You hold still because you've learned the first rule of medieval dressing. Do not wiggle. Wiggles complicate everything. But then comes the belt, the ultimate symbol of obedience. It's meant to keep your tunic in place, yes, but it also subtly teaches you to stand straighter, move slower, and avoid sprawling in ways that expose your under-tunic to the world. A quirky tidbit many people don't know. Some households tied children's belts with little knots, believed to ward off mischievous spirits or bad luck. So if your belt looks like it was tied by a sleepy sailor, just know it's magical protection, not sloppy fashion. Once dressed, you're expected to carry yourself like someone twice your age. Clothes teach you how to move, how to sit, how to walk without tripping over your own hem like a tiny medieval ghost. And you will trip, probably several times before breakfast, but the important thing is that you try not to. Older children glance at your outfit, with the smugness of people who no longer wear baby clothes. They show off their own garments with pride, longer tunics, sturdier belts, and sometimes even shoes. Shoes. The luxury. Shoes are a symbol of responsibility. Shoes say, I run errands, not, I occasionally fall into buckets. You touch the edge of your tunic, feeling the rough weave. It's thick enough to protect you from cold drafts, but breathable enough to survive summer. Barely. Medieval parents don't really care if you're comfortable. Comfort is considered a modern invention, like microwaves or the concept of weekends. Then comes the cloak. It's basically a blanket with a purpose, pinned around your shoulders with a brooch that looks suspiciously sharp. You're told not to lose it. You're also told not to poke yourself with it. This is an impossible balance, and you accept that you will likely disappoint everyone. Historians still argue whether children frequently wore miniature versions of adult fashion or simpler, more practical garments. Some evidence shows kids in basic tunics year-round. Other depictions show them in surprisingly elaborate fabrics, especially in wealthier families. But everyone agrees on this. Clothes were tools for teaching discipline. They shaped your posture. They limited your movement. They reminded you, constantly, of your place in society. Standing in the doorway, you test your new outfit by taking a few steps. Your legs feel shorter somehow, your hips tentative, your arms trapped in fabric that insists on controlling your range of motion. You look down and realize your tunic hangs almost to your shins. Running is no longer an option. Fast walking? Also questionable. You have entered the slow lane of childhood. Your mother adjusts your collar one more time, then smooths your hair with a spit-wet thumb. A medieval parenting tool so universal it might as well be documented in every known manuscript. You submit to it because resistance only makes the process longer and wetter. You look proper, she says. Proper. That's the goal. And properness comes with rules. Don't drag your tunic in the dirt. Don't tear the hem. Don't chew on the sleeves. You've been caught doing that multiple times. Don't sit in puddles. Don't touch anything with soot on it. Basically, don't move like a normal child. You spend the morning trying to keep your clothes neat. You fold your hands. You straighten your sleeves. You avoid sitting too fast because tunics billow and flip in unfortunate ways. You walk carefully like you're balancing a loaf of bread on your head, because one day you probably will. And the strangest rule of all, you're expected to look humble. Modesty isn't just a behaviour, it's a posture. You're taught to lower your gaze slightly, to keep your shoulders relaxed, to avoid standing in ways that make you look proud or defiant. Your clothes, stiff as they are, help remind you, this world values obedience, not flamboyant toddler energy. You end the morning standing beside older children who look like miniature adults in training. You look at them and see your future. Longer tunics, sturdier shoes, belts you can tie yourself, and maybe, just maybe, a cloak that doesn't poke you every time you turn. For now, though, you're a small medieval child in an outfit that demands discipline. And as you walk carefully across the yard, one cautious step at a time, you realise something. Your clothes aren't just clothes. They're your first lessons in how to exist, quietly, properly, obediently, in a world that expects you to grow up faster than your tunic will allow. By the time your clothing has sufficiently limited your ability to bend, wiggle, or breathe too enthusiastically, you're released, finally, to play. Or at least, what medieval society calls play. You'd think this is the one part of your day free from rules, the one part where you get to act like, well, a child. But no, medieval childhood does not believe in unstructured fun. Even your games come with boundaries so specific and baffling that you occasionally wonder if adults wrote them while bored. You step outside into the yard, greeted by the familiar smells of hay, earth, and whatever mystery your neighbour's pig has rolled in today. Older kids are already gathering at the edge of the lane, forming loose groups for various forms of approved recreation. You run toward them, tunic flapping like a tiny beige sail. A mainstream historical fact kicks in immediately. Medieval children had simple games, many of which survive today in some form. Tag, hide and seek, ball games, hoop rolling, stick duels that adults pretended not to see, and chasing chickens, which adults definitely saw and did not approve of. These games were opportunities to learn coordination, social rules, and the fine art of not accidentally injuring the Lord's geese. You join a group of children playing a ball game with a lump of stitched leather. The ball is lumpy, unpredictable, and somehow always headed straight for your face. But before you can even touch it, someone reminds you of the first rule: do not kick it toward the houses. Roof tiles are expensive, and no one wants to explain to father that the reason the ceiling now leaks is because you have terrible aim. The second unwritten rule emerges quickly. Avoid hitting anyone too important. If you accidentally smack the miller's son in the nose, that's a minor disaster. If you hit the Reeves' nephew, well, congratulations. You've just created a whole village subplot. But the strangest and most amusing rule appears during hide and seek. Children are allowed to hide almost anywhere, except in the herb garden, under the spinning wheel, behind the mending bench, near the pigsty, inside any storage barrels, or anywhere the rooster might see you and decide you deserve consequences. You try to hide. Behind a low wall, but an older girl taps your shoulder and whispers, "Not there. We're not allowed. Someone found a snake there once." And that's the end of that. A quirky tidbit hits you mid-game. Some medieval communities believed certain outdoor games attracted wandering spirits or fairies if played at dusk. So children were encouraged, or strictly required, to stop playing before sundown. Not because of safety, but because you might accidentally invite a fairy into the house, which adults considered worse than inviting in a tax collector. You switch games, moving on to the endlessly popular stick-sword fight. Every medieval child understands stick-sword fight. It's intuitive, chaotic, and has exactly 3 rules. 1. Don't swing at heads. 2. Don't swing near the animals. 3. Don't swing near the adults, because they will confiscate the stick and give you a lecture about responsibility, seriousness, and how sticks are not toys. Which is objectively hilarious because everyone knows adults also use sticks for at least 8 different things, including whacking carpets, shooing animals, and occasionally disciplining children. But somehow, when you hold the stick, it becomes a sacred object unfit for play. Historians still argue whether medieval children were supervised during playtime or largely left to their own devices. Some records show adults watching from doorways, others show kids roaming village edges with limited oversight. In your case, adults pretend not to watch, but absolutely keep one eye on you, mostly to ensure you don't wander into the well, the woods, or a travelling merchant's path. At one point, the older kids organise a mock market day. Someone plays the merchant, someone plays the customer, and you are assigned the role of a sheep. You accept this with grace. After all, sheep get to lie down. But even in pretend games, rules creep in. Don't bear too loudly. Don't wander out of your pen. Don't knock over the imaginary cheese. You begin to suspect that medieval society sees rules the way bees see flowers, everywhere, and entirely necessary for life to function. Then someone suggests climbing a tree. This is the moment every medieval child hopes for. Trees are freedom. Trees are thrilling. Trees are enormous wooden playgrounds that require no adult approval, except, yes, there are rules for trees too. You may climb the old elm near the lane, the tall ash behind the blacksmith's house. You may not climb the apple trees, fruit is money, the elder tree, fairies live there allegedly, any tree with a bird's nest, the lord's trees, unless you want to meet a guard with a stick much sturdier than yours. You choose the elm, scramble halfway up and perch on a branch that sways gently under your weight. From here you can see the whole village, the stream glinting like a thin ribbon, the thatched roofs scattered unevenly, the distant fields, shimmering under the sun. For a moment you feel free, until someone below yells, "Don't sit on that branch, it's the one that broke last year." Right. Of course. You shift to another branch, sighing softly. By midday, your playtime looks suspiciously like structured training. You learn balance. You learn spatial awareness. You learn the difference between acceptable mischief and, oh no, father will hear about this. But more importantly, you learn the social rules of childhood, the complex dance of hierarchy, respect, and cooperation. Children here rarely fight over rules. They enforce them together, like tiny officials of recreation. The boundaries keep everyone safe, or at least mostly safe. And yet, despite all the limits, play still feels magical. You're surrounded by other children, all dressed like miniature adults, all darting around with wild energy contained only by the thinnest threads of etiquette. You laugh, you run, you dodge a wildly thrown leather ball, and for a moment, rules or not, you're just a kid in a world that expects you to grow up far too fast. But for now, you play within the lines, because even play, in medieval childhood, is practice. Your afternoon has barely begun when you're reminded, again, that medieval childhood is basically a long rehearsal for a life of formal greetings. You can run, you can play, you can get dirt in places you didn't know dirt could go. But the second an adult approaches, you must transform from muddy goblin to polite miniature courtier in approximately half a heartbeat. The rule is simple, but unbreakable. You must greet every adult properly, not with a wave, not with a hi, definitely not with the chaotic energy you used 5 minutes ago while chasing a chicken. No, your greeting must be a bow, a curtsy, or at the very least a respectful lowering of your head. A mainstream historical fact drives this home. Posture and greeting rituals were huge markers of upbringing in medieval society. People judged your entire family by how well you bowed. If you slouched, hesitated, or forgot entirely, adults didn't think you were rude. They thought your parents were incompetent, raising a tiny future troublemaker. No pressure. So when the village reeve strolls past, long coat, important hat, eyebrows that communicate disappointment as an art form, you freeze like a rabbit that just heard twigs snap. Then, with practiced grace, you bow. Not too deep, that's trying too hard. Not too shallow, that's disrespectful. Just the right angle, like you're greeting a friendly noble who also might yell at you. The reeve nods slightly and continues walking. You exhale, you did it. The social landmine did not explode. Older kids snicker from across the lane, but only because they've mastered the greeting routine. They can bow while holding a bucket, while climbing off a fence, even while chewing bread. It's like a reflex. Meanwhile, you're still trying to figure out how not to fall over every time you lean forward. Next, you run into the blacksmith. His clothes are singed, his beard looks like it has opinions, and his hammer is the size of your head. You give another bow, hoping you're not interrupting him mentally forging something important. He gives you a gruff nod that probably means, "good child," though it could also mean, "move, I don't want to trip over you." As you straighten up, a quirky tidbit flickers through your mind. In some regions, children bowed so often that adults joked they'd end up with permanent neck creases by adulthood. And honestly, you're halfway there already. At this rate, your posture will be flawless, even if your spine is plotting revenge. But greetings aren't just for adults. They apply to anyone above you in the hierarchy, which is everyone except toddlers, goats, and maybe the friend who picks his nose openly in public. Older children expect you to greet them too, not with a full bow, just a head dip. It signals respect. It signals humility. It signals, "I am the small one and you are the one who steals the best sticks during games." You spend the next hour greeting your way across the village like a tiny diplomat. Every time you turn a corner, someone appears, a travelling tanner, a shepherd, a woman carrying an enormous basket of laundry, a man wheeling a barrow of grain that looks heavier than his life choices. Bow, nod, greet, repeat. If you forget, someone will gently remind you, or not so gently, depending on how important they feel today. Historians still argue whether medieval people exaggerated the importance of bowing in childhood, or whether this etiquette was more household-specific. Some manuscripts describe rigid greeting rituals, others barely mention them. But in your village, the rule might as well be tattooed on your tunic. You greet everyone respectfully, because respect keeps the social world from cracking like cheap pottery. Then comes the real test. A noblewoman rides through the village, her cloak flowing, her horse towering, her expression a blend of elegance and, "I haven't had enough sleep for this." Everyone reacts instantly. Adults bow deeply, older kids bow a respectable amount, and you drop into the deepest bow your spine can handle before it snaps in half like a weak twig. Your tunic nearly touches the ground. Your cloak slips sideways, your belt digs into your stomach, your hair falls into your eyes, but you commit. The noblewoman barely glances your way, but she does offer the faintest nod. That tiny acknowledgement feels like divine validation. You straighten up so fast you get lightheaded, but it's worth it. You've greeted nobility and lived. Later, when you join other children near the well, you practice your bows like you're preparing for an etiquette tournament. You laugh, quietly, because you're in public after all, mimic adults, and exaggerate motions until someone inevitably falls over. It happens. It's practically part of the training. But the strangest rule reveals itself as the sun begins to shift. You must bow again when someone leaves. Greetings are bookends. When an adult departs, you acknowledge it. When someone older than you walks away, you acknowledge it. Even when the neighbour's goat wanders past you, you don't bow, but honestly, given his attitude, you're tempted. By evening, your neck is tired. Not sore exactly, just aware. You've bowed more times than you've blinked. But while exhausting, these rituals do something subtle. They teach you to observe, to anticipate, to read the room. You become sensitive to status, tone, and presence. You learn that greeting isn't just about rules. It's about navigating a world where every move, every gesture, every nod holds meaning. And as you stand beside the well, hands folded politely, you realize you've joined a silent symphony of courtesy that stretches across generations. You bow not because you're forced, but because it's how you belong. The bells ring before you see the church, before you smell the beeswax candles, before you feel the cold stone under your feet. Their echo rolls through the village like a slow reminder that your life, every waking hour of it, is attached to rhythms older than your grandparents' grandparents. You don't need a clock, you have bells. And as a medieval child, bells might as well be your entire operating system. A mainstream historical fact, the church controlled time in medieval Europe. Not metaphorically, literally. The bell signalled when to wake, when to work, when to pray, when to rest, and even when to panic because the baker's chimney was smoking again. So your childhood unfolds according to those chimes, each one shaping your day whether you understand the meaning or not. Right now, the bell ringing is terse, the mid-morning prayer. You don't know the theological specifics. You're more concerned with whether your tunic is crooked and whether your stomach might rumble loudly enough to embarrass you. But you know this. When the bell rings, you go. Adults herd the children toward the village church like a flock of wool-covered ducklings. You fall into line behind older kids, all of you walking with a seriousness you do not feel. Your feet are dusty, your cloak itches, and you can already tell the church will be colder than last time, because somehow the temperature inside that stone building is always set to mildly haunted. Entering the church is an exercise in knowing rules without being told. Children walk quietly. Children keep their eyes forward. Children do not poke the person next to them, even if they're asking for it by breathing too loudly. The moment you step inside, the chilly air wraps around you like a damp blanket. The walls are thick, the windows tiny, the candles smoky. It smells like stone, incense, and the collective anxiety of 100 villagers who don't want to sneeze during prayer. You shuffle toward the spot assigned to children, near the side, not too close to the altar, not too close to the door, just close enough that adults can keep an eye on you. You sit, fold your hands, and try not to fidget. A noble goal, an impossible one, a quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some medieval churches had wooden penalty stools for children who misbehaved during service. Not a punishment exactly, more like a public reminder to sit still in the future. You definitely don't want to end up on that stool. You imagine the whole village staring and clucking tongues like disappointed chickens. So you do your best impression of calm. The priest begins chanting in Latin. You don't understand a word of it, but the melody is soothing, repetitive, and strangely hypnotic. The sound fills the church, vibrating in your bones, wrapping around your thoughts like warm wool. You like this part. It's slow, predictable, dreamy. Of course, the second your eyes start to drift closed, someone coughs, and you jolt awake like you've been hit with a divine feather duster. The older children around you know the routine. Bow here, stand here, kneel there, fold your hands. Just so. You copy their movements with the frantic sincerity of a squirrel trying to mirror human behavior. Sometimes you kneel too fast, sometimes too slow, sometimes your tunic catches on your knee and you wobble like a baby deer. But overall, you're improving. Historians still argue whether children understood much of church life or simply participated out of habit. Some say kids absorbed spiritual teachings early. Others say they mostly daydreamed about bread and goats. If we're being honest, your experience leans heavily toward the goat side. Today, though, the priest reads a passage that makes several adults murmur. It's about obedience, respect, the virtues of quiet behavior. You feel the weight of a dozen adult eyes sliding your way as if on cue. You pretend you don't notice. You stare at a stained glass window shaped like a saint holding what looks suspiciously like a loaf of bread. You wonder if saints get hungry. You wonder if saints had to bow at everyone too. The service ends with another echoing chant. You stand, stretch with the tiniest possible movement, and prepare for the final challenge, leaving the church without tripping on anything. Stone floors are uneven, cloaks tangle, children fall. It's practically tradition. But today you manage. You exit into the sunlight feeling relieved, drowsy, and slightly holier than you did an hour ago. Outside, adults disperse quickly, heading back to fields, workshops, and hearths. But you wait. Because the next bell hasn't rung yet, and medieval life teaches you to move only when your internal church-tuned compass says go. You stand in the yard, letting the sun warm your cold fingers. A few other children gather near you, whispering about absolutely nothing important. Whether the priest's robe was extra long today, whether the candle on the left sputtered weirdly, whether the rooster that attacked you last week is secretly possessed. Just normal kid things. Then the next bell rings, this one signalling midday, lunch preparation, more chores, more rules, more quiet observation. You fall into step behind the others, feeling the warm earth under your feet, the echoes of Latin hymns still humming somewhere in your chest. Church isn't just a ritual for you. It's a clock, a teacher, a boundary, a reminder that every hour of your medieval childhood is shaped by rhythms you didn't choose but have already learned to follow. You walk home slowly, feeling both small and strangely tied to something enormous. Like your day is braided into the village itself, looped through each ringing bell. After the bells, after the walk home, after the quick bite of whatever leftovers you're allowed to nibble without violating 15 food rules, you're sent to the part of the day that most medieval children dread and tolerate in equal measure: schooling. Not school with desks and crayons and cheerful posters that say things like, "Dream big." No, your medieval schooling feels more like entering a very small, very serious monastery, where even dreaming is suspicious. Your school might be a corner of the church, a room in someone's house, or a bench under a lean-to roof behind the priest's dwelling. Wherever it is, it smells like parchment, smoke, ink, and the muted panic of children trying very hard not to disappoint a grown-up with a stick. A mainstream historical fact: medieval education, when available, focused on silence, memorization, and obedience. Reading was useful, writing was rarer. Reciting religious verses was non-negotiable. And you? You learn all of this while trying not to wiggle, sneeze, or breathe at a suspicious volume. The schoolmaster, a title that makes him sound friendlier than he is, stands before you in a robe that looks like it's been worn since the last crusade. He watches the children file in with an expression that says, "I have already been disappointed today, and it is only noon." You sit on a narrow wooden bench, legs dangling. Your tunic bunches awkwardly, your cloak itches, and your belt feels like it's personally invested in your suffering. You fold your hands carefully, because every lesson begins with the same rule: speak only when ordered, sit only where told, move only when permitted, no pressure. The older children sit in front. They've earned slightly better benches, and the right to occasionally speak without spontaneously combusting from fear. You sit behind them, far enough that the schoolmaster's gaze hits you only after it has passed through several other unlucky souls. Today's lesson begins with prayers. You recite Latin you don't understand, syllables slipping out of your mouth like borrowed puzzle pieces. You don't know what they mean, but you know they matter, and that's enough. Then the schoolmaster begins the reading lesson. He holds up a board with the alphabet carved into it. You stare at the letters, which might as well be runes. You know a few of them. The ones you don't know glare back at you like disapproving pigeons. You repeat after him, quietly, carefully, hoping the letters come out in the right order. A quirky tidbit pops into your head, one you overheard older kids whisper about. Some medieval schools tied quills to children's wrists so they wouldn't drop them or fidget. You glance down at your own wrist and whisper a thank you to every saint you know. The schoolmaster paces. He carries a long, thin rod, not necessarily to hit anyone, though you've seen it tap a few inattentive heads, but to point at letters, guide your posture, and remind everyone that education is not a spectator sport. You try your best to focus, but medieval benches were designed by someone who hated comfort, and possibly also children. Your legs go numb, your back aches, your brain drifts. You imagine goats in hats. You imagine climbing the elm tree again. You imagine a world where your tunic has pockets. Then the rod taps your desk. Not painfully, just loudly enough to jolt your soul. You read this line. Your stomach drops. You lean forward. The letters blur for a moment, then slowly resolve into something recognizable. You manage to whisper the line correctly, mostly. The schoolmaster nods. Approval. A rare treasure worth more than coins. But then comes writing practice. Writing is harder. Writing is chaos. You're given a piece of chalk or a stylus. The wax tablet is smooth and shiny, like a tiny mirror judging your life choices. You try to form letters the way you practiced. Your chalk squeaks, your lines wobble, your hand cramps, your tablet tilts at least 3 times. Older kids write confidently, their wax tablets filled with letters that look like real words instead of helpless squiggles. You glance at them with admiration and mild envy. Historians still argue whether children enjoyed early schooling or merely endured it. Some accounts describe it as a privilege, others compare it to spiritual boot camp. In your case, it's both, stressful and sacred, difficult and important. You erase your mistakes with the side of your hand. Big mistake. Now both your tablet and your palm are covered in smeared wax, and the schoolmaster sighs heavily, which is medieval for, why does this child test my endurance? You return to copying letters, slowly, carefully. Ah, you've done it. Nope. That one looks like a swan falling over. Break time arrives only when the schoolmaster decides he's heard enough wax scraping to last a lifetime. Children rush outside, but not running because that is forbidden, and gather in the yard. You stretch your legs like a freed prisoner. You enjoy the air. You talk quietly, very quietly, because you are still technically in the teacher's presence. One boy shows you his tablet, proudly displaying letters carved with the confidence of someone who probably isn't afraid of sheep. Then the next session begins. Moral instruction. It includes stories of saints, tales of heroic monks, examples of obedient children, dire warnings about disobedient ones. You sit through the stories, fascinated but also slightly worried that misbehaving children get dramatically terrible fates. One story ends with a child being carried away by wolves for disobeying, probably fictional, but you are not taking chances. Your eyes widen, you sit straighter, you vow never to disobey again, at least not today. As the lesson ends, the schoolmaster dismisses each row. Older children bow properly, younger ones follow. You walk out of the room, quietly, respectfully, with all the grace your tired legs can muster. Outside, the sun greets you like a warm welcome back to your actual life. Your mind buzzes with letters, stories, rules, and the faint hope that tomorrow's lessons might be easier. They won't be. But that's medieval schooling for you. Strict, silent, structured, and slowly shaping you into someone the village will one day rely on. The moment class ends, you expect freedom. You expect to breathe, stretch your legs, maybe chase a leaf dramatically across the lane. But medieval childhood has a surprise waiting for you, one that is somehow both inevitable and underrated in its power. Older children rule your world, not adults, not priests. Older kids, those towering, wise, occasionally tyrannical 12-year-olds who walk around like miniature gods of order. A mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Medieval society had a strict age hierarchy, and older children were often responsible for supervising and disciplining younger ones. That means adults deputize them. They don't ask if older kids want this power. They simply hand it over like passing a torch that can and will be used to boss you around. So when the big kids gather outside the churchyard gate, you and the other small ones trail behind like sheep who've accepted their fate. The oldest boy, maybe 12 or 13, turns around slowly, surveying his small domain. You stand still, hands clasped, trying very hard to look like someone who won't cause trouble. "Let's go," he says. "Where? Why? How quickly?" It doesn't matter. You simply follow. The older children lead the younger ones across the village lane toward chores that look suspiciously like labour disguised as bonding opportunities. They distribute small assignments with military precision. You help collect kindling. You bring water. You three watch the goats and don't let them escape again. You don't get that job. You've already let a goat escape once. That was enough. At first, their authority feels strange. They're not adults. They're not important officials. They're just older. But in medieval life, older is everything. It means experience. It means responsibility. It means they've memorized the rules you're still learning the hard way. You try your best to keep up, but older kids walk faster, talk faster, and judge faster. The oldest girl, whose braids are long enough to serve as ropes in an emergency, points at your cloak. "It's crooked," she says. You freeze. She straightens it with an air of disappointed professionalism, then pats your shoulder like she's finishing a task on her chore list. The other older kids glance at you occasionally, offering a mix of guidance and unsolicited feedback. "Don't step there. Hold the bucket with both hands. That's not how you carry firewood. No, that's how you carry firewood. Careful. Your tunic will rip if you do that." They don't mean to be unkind. This is just the system. They were supervised at your age. Now they supervise. One day, you'll get your turn too, though it currently feels as likely as growing wings. A quirky tidbit brightens your thoughts. In some villages, older boys taught younger children simple combat drills using sticks or wooden shields. Not real fighting, more like organized flailing with rules. Today you're lucky enough to witness such a session. The captain, a proud 12-year-old who probably dreams of knighthood, demonstrates the proper stance. Feet apart, stick held firmly, no swinging above the shoulders, no stabbing motions unless you like being yelled at. You watch in awe. He looks so confident, so important, so tall. You mimic the stance using your own stick, which is bent like a sad noodle. He watches you. You freeze. Your arms go stiff, your stance collapses, your stick wobbles, you look like an anxious scarecrow. Not bad, he says. You nearly ascend into heaven from joy. But the hierarchy has its dark side too. Older kids enforce rules with the seriousness of tax collectors. If you wander off, they drag you back. If you argue, they out-debate you with phrases like, "because I said so," which is medieval law. If you refuse a task, they glare with the kind of disappointment that burns more than any adult scolding. Historians still argue whether this hierarchy existed formally or grew organically. Some manuscripts describe structured youth groups. Others show kids simply adopting social roles over time. But everywhere, older children wielded influence, sometimes gentle, sometimes ruthless, always effective. Your chores continue under their supervision. You gather small twigs and place them carefully in the basket. An older girl nods approvingly. You beam. Approval from older kids tastes better than bread. But then you make a mistake. A small one. A barely mistake. You trip on your own tunic, again, and drop half the kindling. The captain sighs dramatically, like someone mourning a fallen comrade. "You must watch your feet," he says. You nod solemnly, thinking, if my tunic were 3 inches shorter, this wouldn't be an issue. But you smile and gather the sticks again because that is the medieval child way. As afternoon stretches on, the older kids loosen a little. They share stories, funny ones, spooky ones, stories that hint at the responsibilities awaiting you in a few years. You'll run errands soon. You'll carry real tools. You'll take messages to the miller. You'll help with the market. It all sounds so grown up, so impossible, so exciting. Then the older kids do something incredible. They teach you a shortcut, a trick, a skill only they know. Today it's a simple one, how to stack wood so it doesn't collapse like a sad medieval avalanche. They show you slowly, step by step, with a patience that surprises you. And suddenly, you feel something warm. Older kids may boss you around, but they also take care of you. They keep you safe. They teach you things. They make sure you follow rules that protect you. They prepare you for the future in ways adults don't always have time for. When the next bell rings, signaling the end of the day's supervised chaos, the older kids dismiss you with nods, small gestures that feel like medals. You trot home proudly, clutching the memory of your stick-fighting stance, your straightened cloak, and the feeling of being just a little bigger today than yesterday. Maybe medieval childhood isn't so isolating after all. Sometimes it feels like you're part of a ladder, held up from above, and one day holding up someone else. You're barely through the door when your mother gives you that look, the one every medieval child recognizes instantly. It's the universal signal for, eat everything, do not waste a single crumb, or so help me I will list the price of wheat until you cry. Because in medieval childhood, food isn't just nourishment, it's sacred, precious, hard-won, and refusing food, leaving scraps, treating bread like a casual accessory, that's practically a crime. A mainstream historical fact paints the scene clearly. Medieval families lived with constant awareness of scarcity. Harvests failed, winters were harsh, grains spoiled. So the rule drilled into children from their earliest spoonfuls was simple and absolute. Nothing is wasted. Ever. Your mother hands you a small hunk of coarse bread, dense, dark, and sturdy enough to qualify as building material. She watches as you take a bite, checks your chewing technique, then nods with maternal approval. Bread is life. Bread is survival. Bread is the reason no one yells at you today. You glance at the table and see the other treasures of a medieval midday meal. A ladle of pottage, a smear of salty cheese, maybe a sliver of leftover onion. Not fancy, but filling. And each ingredient comes with an unwritten rule about how to eat it. You scoop the pottage carefully, trying not to spill a drop. The table is quiet. Adults talk softly. You focus on your bowl like it contains the secrets of the universe. Then temptation strikes. A crumb falls from your bread. It hits the table, rolls slightly, and stops, mocking you. Before you can react, your mother's hand swoops down with hawk-like precision. She pins the crumb to the wood and flicks it onto your palm. "Eat it," she says. You obey. And honestly, if she hadn't noticed, your conscience would have weighed on you anyway. Because children here are taught that breadcrumbs belong in bellies, not on tables. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Many medieval households had sayings that equated wasting bread with inviting misfortune. Some families believed breadcrumbs carried blessings. Others insisted each crumb had a guardian angel. Whether symbolic or superstitious, the lesson stuck. Wasting food was disrespectful to God, the farm, and the entire household economy. So you chew more carefully now, slowly, reverently. When you finish your bowl, you scrape the sides with your bread, because bread is basically medieval cutlery, and wipe it completely clean. If a modern person saw you, they might think you're licking the bowl out of gluttony. But here, that's just good manners. Historians still argue whether medieval children fully understood the economics of scarcity, or merely followed instructions without question. It's likely both. You don't grasp crop yields or feudal dues, but you absolutely know these things. Food is not guaranteed. Food is shared. Food is respected. Food is never, ever left behind. As you finish the last bite, you see an older child push a small onion piece to the edge of his bowl. Big mistake. Your grandmother, who moves with surprising stealth, appears behind him like an avenging culinary spirit. "You forget something?" she asks. He immediately eats the onion. You try not to laugh, out loud anyway. Then you're given a small task: collect any fallen crumbs around the table and toss them to the chickens outside. This isn't considered wasteful because chickens turn crumbs into eggs, eggs into meals, meals into survival. The medieval logic loop continues, neat and efficient. You gather crumbs from the floor, careful to pick up even the tiny ones hiding in cracks. The dog watches you with mournful eyes, absolutely certain those crumbs belong to him. But rules are rules. Crumbs go to the chickens, not the dog. Outside, you scatter the crumbs. Chickens gather instantly, pecking with chaotic enthusiasm. For a moment, you feel oddly proud. Those crumbs are no longer waste. They're resources. Returning inside, you sit quietly while adults finish their meal. Your stomach is warm. Your fingers smell faintly of onion and wood. And the rule about never wasting food sinks deeper into you, the way all medieval rules eventually do. But there's another rule waiting, one that's less obvious yet equally strict. You must finish eating even if you don't like the food. There's no "I don't want this." No "I'm full." No "do we have anything else?" You eat what exists, what's available, what your family worked hard to produce. Preference doesn't enter the medieval vocabulary until you're wealthy or grown, probably both. One child at the table hesitates over a ladle of bitter greens. His father clears his throat. The room goes still. Everyone knows how this ends. The child swallows the greens. You glance at your own bowl, filled with a slightly weird mixture of cabbage and barley, and decide it tastes great. Best thing you've ever eaten. You'd happily eat it again. Maybe forever. A soft joke forms in your mind. If medieval children ever invent the concept of picky eating, they'll probably be banished for heresy. As the adults rise from the table, the final food rule settles over you. If food is offered, you thank the giver. If you're full, you keep that information to yourself. And if there's more, you take it only when told. It's not just politeness, it's survival etiquette. When lunch is finally over, you step back outside. Your stomach is full, your conscience clear, and your understanding of crumbs elevated to spiritual levels. And for the rest of the day, every time you see a crumb on the ground, you feel a tiny jolt of fear. The good kind, the medieval kind, the "my grandmother might appear out of thin air" kind. Because in your world, food is life, and every crumb is worth bowing for. The afternoon drifts on, warm and slow, and just when you think the rules of medieval childhood couldn't possibly get stranger, the adults introduce you to an entirely new category of constraints, those dictated not by practicality, but by superstition. These are the rules no one questions, the rules everyone follows, the rules that make absolutely no sense, but terrify you anyway. A mainstream historical fact sets the stage. Medieval life was steeped in folk beliefs, protective rituals, and everyday superstitions passed down through families. People feared invisible forces, spirits, demons, fairies, curses, the evil eye, wandering souls, and whatever lived near the edge of the woods. And children, being small and squishy and prone to wandering, were believed to be especially vulnerable. Which is why your day is suddenly wrapped in more invisible rules than a modern legal code. The first one hits you as soon as you step outside. Your grandmother sees you and immediately gasps. "You forgot your charm!" You freeze. She rummages through a basket and ties a tiny object to your belt. A smooth pebble rubbed with salt. It's supposed to keep away bad spirits. You're not sure if it actually works, but you do know this. Refusing it is not an option unless you enjoy disappointing a grandmother, which is the most dangerous supernatural force of all. A quirky tidbit you've heard whispered among children. Some families use garlic, iron, or red thread instead of stones. One kid in the village wears a little iron ring on a string, and everyone agrees he's basically invincible. Charm secured, you continue on your way, but your grandmother calls out again, "And don't whistle!" You weren't whistling. You weren't planning to whistle. You're not even sure you can whistle reliably. But whistling apparently invites wandering spirits, or summons the wind in a way that insults it, or calls the attention of evil forces. The rules vary depending on which adult you ask, but the outcome is the same: whistling, bad, silence, survival. As you walk toward the well, you pass the old elm tree. You like this tree, you climb it. You talk to it sometimes, but today, an older child blocks your path. Don't step on its roots, he warns. Fairies live there. You look at the twisted roots spiraling like frozen waves in the soil. They don't look like fairy houses, they look like roots. But again, no questioning. You step around them with exaggerated care because the idea of angering fairies is suddenly horrifying. Historians still argue over how seriously medieval people took fairy lore. Some regions treated it as metaphor, others as absolutely literal. But children took everything literally, especially when older kids delivered the warnings in the same tone adults use for "don't fall in the well." You continue toward the well, but there's another rule waiting. A woman carrying laundry gestures to you. "Don't look into it," she says. "Not even a peek." You blink. Why? Because wells are dark. Because they reflect faces strangely. Because spirits like dark places. Because someone once swore they saw a shadow person in the water. The explanations vary, but the rule stands. Never look directly into the well. You nod and obey, staring at the dusty ground like it's the most interesting object alive. Then comes the worst moment of the afternoon. You sneeze. Not a polite little sneeze. A dramatic, explosive sneeze that startles a chicken. Your neighbour rushes over instantly. "Make the sign of the cross," she urges. You do. Because sneezing is a vulnerable moment in medieval logic. The moment when spirits might try to slip inside your body like uninvited house guests. Some families say, "God bless you for protection." Others say, "Stay strong." Your village? A firm cross motion is required, plus maybe a whispered prayer depending on the severity of the sneeze. Fortunately, yours wasn't a 3-sneeze event, which would require holy water. You carry on, shaken, but alive. Next comes the rule about avoiding the crossroads during certain hours of the day. Crossroads are considered liminal spaces, thin places where spirits wander. At noon and dusk, they're especially risky. So when the older kids shout, "Not that way," you instantly pivot in the opposite direction, even though that route is shorter. One boy tells you a story about a traveller who vanished at a crossroads. Another tells you about a wandering ghost who asks for directions but must never be answered. Are these true? Probably not. Do they terrify you into compliance? Absolutely. As you walk, you notice a horsehair rope tied over a doorway. You ask softly, "What's that for?" Your mother answers, "To keep the nightmares out." Of course it is. You accept this without question because this is your world, full of rules designed to protect you from forces adults believe are all around. You don't see spirits in the well. You don't feel fairies pulling at your cloak. You have never once been chased by a wandering ghost, except that one time the rooster charged you, but he was probably just cranky. But these beliefs shape your childhood as firmly as any chore or etiquette lesson. Historians still debate how widespread such superstitions were and how much they varied between regions. Some argue medieval life was deeply magical. Others say superstition existed more in the margins. But for you, superstition is everywhere, woven into daily routines, whispered in warnings, tied around your waist in the form of a pebble charm that now feels surprisingly comforting. Your afternoon ends with one final rule: never go to sleep with the door unlatched. Your mother repeats this nightly, not because of thieves, not because of wolves, but because things wander at night. You don't ask what things means. You don't want to know. You just promise to sleep soundly and not wander. Because in a world filled with invisible boundaries, you understand one thing clearly. Adults aren't just protecting you from danger, they're protecting you from the unknown. And that might be the most medieval rule of all. You wake the next morning to something new. Not freedom, you'll never get that. Not rest, you didn't get that either. But responsibility. Real responsibility. The kind that comes with tools, rules, and adults staring at you like they're evaluating whether you're finally ready to become a miniature version of them. Because today, you're stepping into the world of apprenticeship. Not officially, not yet. But medieval childhood blurs the lines. Once you're old enough to stand for more than 10 minutes without toppling over, you're old enough to start learning a trade. A mainstream historical fact. Most medieval children began in formal apprenticeship extremely early. You didn't wait until your teens. You started by helping, watching, carrying, fetching, and absorbing the unwritten rules of a craft long before you were considered a true apprentice. By the time you reached official status, half the work already lived in your bones, and today you're shadowing the village carpenter. He gestures for you to follow him, and you do, partly because you want to learn, and partly because saying no to a grown man holding a saw feels like a terrible idea. The carpenter's workshop smells like wood shavings, resin, dust, and the faint lingering regrets of everyone who has ever accidentally hammered a thumb. Sunlight slips through the slats, illuminating floating motes of dust that swirl like tiny spirits debating the meaning of existence. You step inside cautiously. Tools hang everywhere. Chisels, mallets, awkwardly shaped metal objects you pretend to understand. The carpenter notices you gawking and gives a grunt that translates to, "Don't touch anything unless you feel like paying for new tools by working until you're 50. He hands you a broom. Your training has begun. You sweep. Slowly, carefully, trying not to knock over anything that looks expensive or sharp or enchanted. But apprenticeship isn't just chores. The carpenter pauses his work, kneels beside a block of wood and taps it. "Feel that," he says. You touch it with reverence. It's smooth in some places, rough in others, warm from the sunlit workbench. He explains that good wood speaks, which is confusing until he raps his knuckles on it, and you hear the hollow tone. A quirky tidbit. Medieval craftsmen often describe materials as having personalities. Wood could be stubborn, iron could be temperamental, wool could be fussy. Children learn to treat materials with respect, as if they were fellow workers. You nod sagely, pretending the wood is whispering secrets even though it mostly sounds like a block of wood. The carpenter shows you how to hand him tools, always handle first, never blade first, and never with the dramatic flair you use while pretending sticks are swords. He guides your hands as you try to hold a small plane. It's heavier than you expected, more awkward, but thrilling. You're holding a real tool. He lets you try one stroke. On a board? Just one. The wood shaves off in a thin curl, soft as a feather. You grin. He grunts approval. You feel like you've been knighted. But apprenticeship comes with rules. So many rules that the carpenter doesn't even bother explaining most of them. You're expected to learn by watching, not asking, because asking questions is reserved for older, more experienced apprentices. So you observe. Rule 1. Tools go back where you found them. Rule 2. Never interrupt the master when he's measuring. Rule 3. Wood shavings go in the right corner, not the left corner. You mistakenly tried the left corner once. The carpenter's eyebrow twitched so hard it could have lifted a roof tile. Rule 4. Do not sit on the workbench. Ever. Under any circumstances. Even if you're tired. Rule 5. Never sharpen anything without supervision unless you enjoy bleeding. The carpenter demonstrates how to notch joints, how to smooth edges, how to check alignment by squinting like someone judging questionable decisions. You mimic him from a safe distance, nodding thoughtfully even when you understand only 70% of what he's doing. Historians still argue whether children enjoyed early craft exposure or viewed it as unavoidable drudgery. For you, it's both. You're tired, dusty, mildly terrified of stepping on a nail, but you're also proud. This is real work, important work, skill that shapes a village. At one point, the carpenter hands you a block of wood and says, "Make it smooth." Then he walks away. You stare at the block stares back. Your tool feels too big. Your hands feel too small. But you try. You scrape carefully, slowly. The wood resists. You reposition your grip. You scrape again. A curl forms. Victory. You work quietly until the carpenter returns, inspects your progress, and grunts in approval. For a medieval child, a grunt equals a shower of glitter and applause. Then an older apprentice arrives, tall, confident, and wielding tools like extensions of his own limbs. He barely acknowledges you, which is standard. Apprenticeships have their own hierarchy, and you're currently at small creature who sweeps. He demonstrates a mortise and tenon joint with the casual mastery of someone who has done it 1,000 times. You watch in awe. One day, maybe, you'll make joints like that. Right now, you're still figuring out how not to drop wood shavings everywhere. Later, the apprentice gives you your first piece of advice. Don't put your fingers near the blade. You nod vigorously. It's unclear whether this is encouragement or a warning about your general vibe. The carpenter has one more lesson for you. Wood has seasons: winter wood, summer wood, wet wood, dry wood. They all behave differently. You pretend to understand, but mostly you're imagining wood having seasonal moods like a medieval teenager. By late afternoon, you're exhausted. You've swept for hours. Your arms ache from holding tools. Your tunic is covered in sawdust that somehow entered your socks, your sleeves, your hair, and possibly your soul. But you feel older, stronger, like you know something important, something adult, because apprenticeship isn't a single skill. It's a doorway into the adult world, a world where you create instead of just observe, a world where you will one day take on a trade that can feed your family. As you step out of the workshop, sawdust trailing behind you like a tiny cloak of achievement, you catch the carpenter watching you with something like approval. Maybe you'll be good at this someday. Maybe you'll be more than a child who bows and sweeps and avoids crumbs. Maybe in this medieval world you're beginning to shape a place for yourself. By the time you finish sweeping sawdust out of your socks and hair, and possibly from emotional regions of your soul, you're thrust straight into another pillar of medieval childhood, the performance of politeness. Not regular politeness. Not modern please and thank you politeness. No, this is medieval politeness, which feels less like manners and more like acting in a very strict play where the script is unwritten, but everyone else somehow memorized it. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval etiquette was elaborate, formal, and deeply tied to status. If you behaved politely, your family was praised. If you behaved impolitely, even by accident, your family was judged, side-eyed, whispered about, and possibly banned from borrowing anyone's cow ever again. And in this world, borrowing a cow is basically a human right. You're put to the test the moment you walk into the main room of your home. A visitor is there, a distant cousin, an aunt by marriage, or someone whose exact relationship is unclear because medieval families are sprawling, complex, and mildly exhausting. Adults look at you expectantly. You remember the rules. Rule 1, enter calmly, no running. Rule 2, keep your hands visible, no mysterious pocket behavior. Rule 3, greet properly, bow or curtsy, make eye contact but not too much. Rule 4, if they ask how you are, answer modestly. I am well, not I'm great, because enthusiasm is suspicious. You perform your bow. You keep your head lowered just long enough to show respect, but not so long that you look like you've fallen asleep. The visitor nods approvingly. You exhale. Phase 1 complete. Then comes conversation, except you aren't allowed to initiate it. You stand silently, waiting for the adult to address you. It feels like waiting for a jury verdict. What have you learned today? The visitor asks. A harmless question. Easy, simple. You panic anyway. You glance at your mother. She nods slightly, encouraging you to speak. You answer softly. I swept the workshop and learned about wood. You intentionally leave out the part where you accidentally tripped over a log and face-planted into a basket of shavings. That detail is not relevant to your persona of well-trained politeness. The visitor smiles. You pass phase 2. Then comes phase 3, the awkward sitting ritual. You're invited to sit, meaning someone has literally said the words, because sitting without being invited is a medieval sin. You choose your spot carefully, making sure not to sit. Too close to the fire, improper. Too close to the visitor, presumptuous. Too far away, aloof. On anything important, a disaster. You settle onto a low stool, hands folded neatly, back straight, eyes lowered in the universal medieval child posture of, I am pleasant and harmless and definitely not planning anything chaotic. But politeness doesn't stop there. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some medieval etiquette guides instructed children not to scratch, fidget, or adjust their clothing while in company, even if something itched, tickled, or stung. which is a problem because your calf is currently being attacked by either a flea or your imagination. You resist the urge to scratch. You resist the urge to wiggle. You resist the urge to die dramatically. Politeness requires endurance. The adults talk. They talk about crops, about someone's cousin getting married, about a neighbour who borrowed a tool and didn't return it. Scandalous. About whether the bishop's visit will require extra bread. Their words roll over you like slow waves, soothing and confusing at the same time. You know the rule. Children must appear attentive without participating. So you nod occasionally, smile gently when adults look at you, and pretend you understand anything beyond 20% of the conversation. But politeness can get weird. Very weird. For example, you're supposed to hide reactions. If someone tells a joke, you may smile, but not laugh loudly. If someone says something outrageous, you must stay neutral. If someone mentions a dog, you must not shout, "I like dogs," even though that's the truest statement you've ever held in your heart. Historians still argue whether medieval children enjoyed these polite performances or simply endured them. Some sources paint them as proud moments, others portray them as stressful tests of self-control. For you, it's a bit of both. You're proud you haven't fallen off your stool, but also deeply aware of the flea, real or imaginary, still gnawing your leg. Eventually, the visitor stands to leave. You jump up a little too quickly, but catch yourself just in time. Another bow, a quiet farewell. A polite "God keep you," delivered in the softest voice your lungs can produce. The visitor smiles warmly. Your mother looks relieved. You've done it. You've survived polite company without violating any rules or spilling anything explosive. But politeness follows you outside too. When you step into the lane, a group of older children passes, and you give them the half bow expected for your rank in the kid hierarchy. They nod back, respectful, proper. The invisible machinery of medieval social order continues smoothly. Then a dog walks by. You pet it. This is allowed. Finally, as you run toward your next chore, you reflect on how politeness in your world is more like a dance. A precise, subtle performance where every gesture matters. It's exhausting, yes, but it teaches something valuable. How to carry yourself, how to observe, how to navigate adults, how to survive in a society where social mistakes matter as much as physical ones. You aren't just learning manners, you're learning how to be seen and accepted. And for a medieval child, acceptance is everything. Just when you think you've mastered the art of quiet sitting, respectful bowing, crumb saving, and not disturbing any possible fairies, medieval childhood drops its heaviest lesson on your small, tired shoulders. Punishment is normal, expected, and delivered with calm efficiency. Not cruelty, just consequence. Not rage, just routine, and almost never negotiable. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment. Medieval discipline was swift, direct, and widely accepted as necessary for shaping a responsible adult. Households, schools, guilds, and even older children enforced it. Medieval society didn't ask, "Should we punish?" It asked, "Which punishment fits the rule that was broken?" And today, you break a rule, a small one, barely a rule at all. But still a rule. You're carrying a bucket of water, an important task, and you get distracted by a butterfly. A bright, floaty, mesmerizing butterfly that seems spiritually connected to your soul. You follow it with your eyes, then your feet, then your whole body, and the bucket tips. Water spills across the ground in a dramatic, shimmering flood. It's the kind of spill that would look poetic in a painting, but looks incredibly inconvenient today. Because water means work. Water means walking to the well. Water means time, and in medieval life, time is precious. You freeze. The butterfly escapes unpunished. You're not so lucky. Your mother approaches, not furious, just firm. She doesn't shout. Medieval adults rarely waste energy on shouting. Instead, she takes your wrist gently and leads you inside for correction. The rule is simple. You made a mistake, so you face a consequence. She assigns you a punishment appropriate for your age. Not harsh, not cruel, just something that ensures you learn the lesson. Today it's extra sweeping. More than you want, less than you fear. Enough to make the point. You sweep every corner of the house, pushing dust so old it probably remembers the Norman conquest. Your arms ache, your shoulders sag, but you know the rule, you do it without complaint. Because complaining? That earns extra punishment. A quirky tidbit makes you feel slightly better. Many medieval parents believed punishments should be proportional, consistent, and delivered without anger. The idea was not to scare children, but to train them, like guiding a tree's growth with careful pruning. Some families even had little rhymes about discipline, cheery poems that somehow made punishments sound like gardening. Still, sweeping feels endless. When you finally finish, your mother inspects the room like a strict inspector general of household dust. She nods once, approvingly. And just like that, the punishment ends. No grudges, no lectures, no emotional aftershocks. The rule is learned. Life moves on. But medieval discipline doesn't only come from parents. When you return outside, the older children are enforcing their own parallel justice system, the tiny court of medieval kid law. A younger boy apparently broke the stick-fighting rule about swinging too high. He gets sentenced to sit on a stump for several minutes, still, quiet, and reflective. A timeout, medieval edition. Everyone accepts it as fair, even him. You watch, fascinated. Children disciplining children. It's surprisingly orderly. Then there are the school punishments. Ah yes. The schoolmaster and his infamous rod, not used often but present enough to loom like a physical manifestation of disappointment. Yesterday a boy arrived late and had to kneel during the morning prayer. That's it. No dramatic punishment. Just quiet kneeling. Long enough to sting the knees, long enough to remember. The schoolmaster believes, and medieval society agrees, that discipline works best when it's predictable, calm, unavoidable. Historians still argue whether medieval punishments were harsher than today's, or simply different. Some accounts describe severe measures, others show surprisingly gentle corrections. The truth varies widely by class, region, and personality. But what's consistent is this: punishment is expected, normalized, and quickly resolved. Later that day, as you help scrub a wooden bowl near the water barrel, you accidentally splash water onto the cloak of an older cousin. You brace for impact. But he just looks at you, raises one eyebrow and says, "Be careful." That's it. Because medieval correction isn't always punishment. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes a lesson, sometimes just a stern look that could curdle goat's milk. Your cousin hands you the bowl back with a tiny nod. You nod too. The moment ends. But the real test comes shortly before dusk. You're chasing a chicken, not for fun this time, but because it escaped the yard again and you're responsible for catching it. You corner it successfully, grab it gently and carry it home triumphantly, until you trip over a root and drop it. The chicken squawks. You groan. Your father appears. He surveys the scene, a dusty, embarrassed child holding half a chicken feather in each hand, and sighs the sigh of a man whose soul has carried many chickens in its time. "You must be more careful," he says. "Now go fetch it again." This is punishment too, not labelled as such, but real. You made a mistake. You fix the mistake. Consequence as correction. You spend 5 minutes chasing the chicken again. You succeed. Barely. When you finally return it to the coop, your father pats your shoulder. Not praise exactly, just closure. The lesson is over. Tomorrow is a new day. And that's the quiet truth of medieval discipline. It's not about breaking you. It's about shaping you, teaching you, molding you into someone who understands how your choices ripple through a household that cannot afford chaos. Punishment is not dramatic, not emotional, not optional. It simply exists. Steady, predictable, woven into the structure of your childhood. And though you dread it, you also understand it. Because in this world, every mistake has a cost, and every corrected action keeps the household running smoothly. You fall asleep that night feeling tired, wiser, and slightly resentful toward chickens. As the sun dips lower and the shadows stretch long and thin across the village lane, you're reminded of yet another invisible lattice of rules shaping your medieval childhood, where you can and cannot walk, not suggested paths, not be careful zones, hard boundaries, territories marked by custom, danger, superstition, social order, and the occasional angry goose. A mainstream historical fact. Medieval villages were tight clusters of winding lanes, open yards, shared pathways, fields, and forbidden spaces, each with unwritten expectations about who belonged where. Children weren't free to roam. They navigated a map etched not on parchment but in household memory. And today, You're learning that map all over again. Your mother hands you a small basket and says, "Go to the miller's house and bring back the cloth scraps he promised." A simple task. A minor errand. Except medieval life means your route is basically a minefield of social rules. You step outside determined to follow them perfectly. Rule 1. Stay in the centre of the lane. Children are forbidden from walking too close to the ditches because those ditches contain mud, questionable puddles, frogs, potential diseases, mysteries best left uninvestigated. Also, one time, a boy stepped too close and sank knee-deep in muck. He's still known as Bogleg Hugh, and you do not want a nickname like that. You walk carefully, basket on your arm like a very small merchant. Rule 2. Avoid the pig path. It looks tempting, it's shorter, shaded and pleasant. But that path belongs to the pigs, and pigs, in the medieval hierarchy of danger, rank somewhere between mean dog and unpredictable ox. A pig once chased a girl down the lane until she climbed a fence and refused to come down until dusk. You have no desire to repeat her legacy, so you take the longer, safer route. Older children pass you, nodding at your good lane etiquette. You feel proud, responsible, almost adult. Then you reach the market square. Well, what counts as a square in a tiny village. It's mostly a packed patch of dirt with a grain stall and a table of onions. But it has rules too. Rule 3. Children must not run through market areas. Running risks bumping into adults carrying precious goods, knocking over baskets, or, worst of all, crashing into the brewer's barrels. That happened once. There was weeping, there was shouting, there were sticky children for days. You slow your steps and enter with the seriousness of a monk approaching an altar. The tanner waves at you. You bow, you continue. But the next boundary lies just beyond the market, the smithy. Not forbidden, exactly, but dangerous. Absolutely dangerous. Rule 4 states, do not enter the smithy without permission. Metal sparks are unpredictable. Hot iron is unforgiving. And the blacksmith, though kind, has the reflexes of someone who once scorched his own eyebrow and never forgot the scare. You pause, outside the smithy, keeping a respectful distance as you watch him hammer a glowing piece of metal. The ring of iron fills the air, sharp, rhythmic, strangely comforting. But you do not go inside. You know better. Then comes the truly forbidden place, the Lord's Road. It's smoother than the others, lined with stones, leading straight toward the manor house. It's not blocked off, but everyone knows children don't walk on it, unless specifically asked to deliver something to the manor. Walking it without permission signals boldness, presumption, or ignorance, and medieval society has little patience for any of those. You glance at it longingly. It looks so clean, so straight, so not covered in chickens. But you stay far away. Your mother would sense it somehow. She always does. Historians still argue whether these movement rules were enforced strictly or just casually taught. Some accounts describe villages with rigid zones. Others show free-roaming children. But the truth likely sits somewhere in between. Kids learned boundaries through a mix of warnings, stories, consequences, and observation, just like you. Eventually you arrive at the miller's house. It smells like grain, flour dust, and whatever the miller had for lunch. You knock politely. 2 taps, not 3, because 3 taps is how adults announce themselves. The miller opens the door. He looks tired. Millers always look tired, like the weight of every grain sack rests directly on their eyebrows. You present your basket and request the cloth scraps. He nods and hands them over, colourful pieces meant for rag rugs repairs, or whatever your mother is sewing this week. Mission accomplished. But now you must get home, and the return journey has its own set of rules, some of which are very odd. Rule 5. Never cut behind the animal pens. It's muddy, narrow, and guarded by the world's angriest rooster. Rule 6. Don't cross the stream unless an older child is with you. Even shallow water is dangerous if you're small, clumsy, and wearing a tunic that becomes a soggy anchor when wet. Rule 7. Avoid the crossroads at this hour, not for safety, for superstition. Crossroads at dusk are whispered to be thin places where shadows wander. This rule is so deeply rooted in your bones that you don't question it, not even when you desperately want to take the shortcut. So you choose the longer path again, hugging the lane, basket pressed to your chest. As you walk, you make way for a cart full of firewood, a woman balancing a pot on her hip, Two older boys carrying a goose that looks like it's plotting revenge. Every interaction reinforces the final unwritten rule. Children yield the road. Always. You step aside, you bow, you wait, you continue. By the time your house comes into view, your tunic is dusty, your feet ache, and you've memorized 60 new reasons not to step in random places. And yet, you feel oddly accomplished, because you didn't just follow the road, you followed the rules of the road, the invisible grid that keeps you safe, keeps you polite, keeps you part of the village rhythm. Medieval children don't wander freely. They learn the village the way you learn a language, quietly, carefully, and with deep respect for the boundaries that protect you. You step inside your home, hand your mother the cloth scraps, and she nods approvingly. You've completed your errand. You've navigated the world correctly. For a medieval child, that's victory. You barely set the cloth scraps on the table before you're swept into another essential part of medieval childhood: how to behave around strangers. Not dangerous strangers, though those exist too, but the whole spectrum of unfamiliar adults who drift through village life. Travellers, merchants, messengers, pilgrims, tinkers, noble servants, wandering performers, and the occasional suspicious person who claims to be selling medicinal powders, but looks like he definitely mixed them in a bucket behind a barn. A mainstream historical fact frames the moment. Medieval villages were small, tight-knit communities where outsiders were treated with a blend of caution, respect, curiosity, and rule-based etiquette. Children were expected to follow those rules more strictly than anyone else. And today, like so many days, a stranger passes through. You hear the commotion before you see him, voices rising, chickens scattering, a dog barking as if performing security duty with great enthusiasm. By the time you reach the lane, a traveller stands at the village edge with a pack on his back, dust on his boots, and a road-weary expression. Older children gather at a respectful distance, far enough not to interfere, close enough to stare. You join them, clutching your hands behind your back in the official medieval child pose of "I am here but not part of this conversation." Your mother steps out of the house, catches sight of the traveller and gives you the look. You know what it means. Mind your manners. Do not approach. Do not speak. Do not touch anything. You nod solemnly and stand very still. The man greets the villagers with a tired smile. He speaks in an accent slightly different from yours, familiar but strange enough to spark curiosity. He asks for directions to the next town. Adults answer politely but cautiously. Outsiders are potential news bringers, but also potential trouble. You watch the exchange carefully. You study the traveller's boots, his pack, the way adults tilt their heads when speaking to him. You're learning the subtle rules, reading strangers the same way you read weather signs, because this world teaches you early. Strangers are unpredictable, not dangerous by default, but never to be assumed safe either. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some villages believed children could accidentally attract unwanted magic if they spoke to unfamiliar travellers, especially at dusk. So children were instructed to remain silent, respectful, and distant, not out of fear, but out of caution woven into everyday life. The traveller finishes speaking with the adults. He glances at the group of children, smiles, nods politely, and continues on his way. The moment dissolves like dust in sunlight. But the lesson lingers. Later, as you carry a basket of kindling across the lane, you encounter another type of stranger. A merchant. He's colourful, loud, smells faintly of spices and adventure. His cart is filled with objects so fascinating you nearly forget to breathe. Shiny trinkets, dyed cloth, wooden toys, small metal charms, and one carved whistle that looks suspiciously like something you would accidentally swallow. You inch closer without meaning to. Your father notices. He clears his throat. A gentle warning, but a warning nonetheless. Children do not crowd merchants. Children do not touch their goods. Children do not ask prices. Children do not interrupt adult conversations. You freeze like a startled squirrel. The merchant winks at you. Your father pretends not to notice. You pretend you are a motionless part of the scenery. The merchant demonstrates a toy, a carved spinning top that dances on the ground like it's alive. Your soul leaves your body with awe. You desperately want to reach for it, but your hands remain plastered to your sides because you enjoy being a living child. The adults haggle. You observe silently. Everything is a performance. The merchant's dramatic hand gestures, the villager's skeptical expressions, the careful dance of price and value. Historians still argue whether medieval children were encouraged to interact with travelling merchants. Some records show kids clustering around market stalls, others emphasise strict distance. In your village, the rule is clear: look but do not engage. Curiosity is allowed, chaos is not. Later still, you meet the third category of stranger, the suspicious outsider. Everyone feels it instantly. He arrives at sunset, bad timing. He wears a hood, bad sign. He doesn't greet adults properly, catastrophic. Villagers stiffen, conversations stop. The air feels charged, heavy. Children instinctively step back closer to their homes. You follow their cue without needing to be told. Your grandmother appears beside you like a summoned guardian spirit. She whispers, "Don't look at him," which of course means you immediately want to look at him, but you don't. Not really, only a side glance, a very tiny one. The stranger asks for ale. He speaks rudely. He pays with coins no one recognizes. Adults exchange uneasy glances. You understand little of what's said, but you understand tone. A vital medieval skill, and one children learn early. This man is not trusted. He is not welcomed warmly. He will not be offered hospitality beyond necessity. So you stay behind your grandmother's skirts, quiet as a mouse who also practices good manners. Eventually the stranger leaves. Everyone relaxes at once, and the rule, engraved deeper than before, echoes in your mind. Strangers are approached with politeness, not trust. Respect, not familiarity. Distance, not friendship. On your way home, you pass a group of pilgrims on the road, travelling toward a distant shrine, wearing badges that mark their journey. Pilgrims are generally well regarded. You're allowed to wave at them. One smiles and lifts his hand in return. You feel a rush of joy, but only for a moment, because your mother gently guides your arm downward. "Wave once," she says softly, "not twice." Another rule you didn't know you were breaking. As the sky deepens into evening, you reflect on everything you've learned. Strangers come in many forms, some friendly, some harmless, some potentially dangerous, all requiring respect and distance. You learn to observe quietly, to measure tone, to read faces, to stand back, to speak only when spoken to, and above all, you learn that the safest path is always the cautious one. Because in your medieval world, childhood isn't shielded from adults. It's trained to understand them long before you're big enough to join them. By the time the sky fades into deeper shades of blue and the evening chill creeps across the village like a slow-moving hush, you're reminded of yet another rule of medieval childhood, one that shapes every night of your life. You don't own your sleep. Your household does. Your bedtime isn't just when you're tired. It's when the chores end, when the fire needs tending, when adults decide you're done for the day, when the last bell fades, when the hearth dimly glows, and when the household's routines dictate that rest, not comfort, must finally begin. A mainstream historical fact underlines the moment. Sleeping arrangements in medieval homes were communal, cramped, seasonal, and dictated by custom. Few families had separate rooms. Beds were shared, floors were shared, blankets were shared, and privacy was a myth. Tonight, as the last light slides behind the treetops, you step inside the house and immediately feel the shift in atmosphere. The day's chaos softens, voices lower, footsteps slow. The whole household begins to wind down into a kind of ritualized evening choreography, quiet, practical, and rule-heavy. The hearth glows faintly. Your mother adds a log. Your father checks the latch on the door, and you prepare for medieval bedtime, which is both comforting and extremely weird. Rule 1, you sleep where you're told, not where you want, not even where you slept last night necessarily. The sleeping setup changes with seasons and available warmth. In summer, you might sleep near a window for fresh air. In winter, you sleep as close to the hearth as humanly possible without becoming part of it. Tonight the air is cool, so you're assigned to the sleeping bench near the wall. You climb onto it, spreading out the wool blanket that smells like smoke, summer grass, and the faint hope of warmth. Your younger sibling climbs in beside you. Older siblings settle somewhere on the floor. Grandmother claims her corner with the authority of someone who survived at least 2 plagues and doesn't plan to negotiate bed space. No one complains. Complaining delays sleep. Delaying sleep delays tomorrow's chores, which delays everything else, and medieval life does not tolerate delays. Rule 2. The fire must be tended correctly. Not too bright, not too dim. A glowing ember bed is ideal. Warmth, light, and safety without the risk of sparks leaping onto blankets. You watch your mother adjust the coals like she's performing a sacred ritual. In a way, she is. A quirky tidbit flickers into your mind. Many medieval families believed that an improperly banked fire could invite wandering spirits or unlucky dreams. So the fire must be tamped carefully, respectfully, almost reverently. You curl under your blanket, knees tucked to your chest. The wool is scratchy, but it's warm, and warmth beats everything else. You hear the creaks of the house settling, the faint cluck of chickens outside, the soft snoring of the dog, who sleeps inside tonight because it's cold and because he's earned it. Then comes the rule you hate most. Rule 3. Stay still. Even if you itch, even if the blanket feels weird, even if your sibling breathes on you with the force of a small hurricane, movement disrupts others. Disrupting others earns scolding. Scolding at bedtime is the worst. You try your best. You really do. But the blanket tickles your ankle. A straw bit pokes your neck. Someone else's elbow digs into your rib. You shift slightly, just a little, barely a wiggle. Your sibling immediately says, "Stop." You freeze. Adults settle onto the main bed, a wooden frame with a straw mattress stuffed with whatever was available that year: straw, reeds, old clothing, possibly regrets. The bed creaks loudly enough to wake the rooster. Everyone goes quiet. You listen to the nighttime sounds, the crackle of the last embers, a distant dog barking, the soft hoot of an owl. And then, inevitably, someone farts. Quietly but decisively. You try not to laugh. Laughing at bedtime is forbidden. Absolutely forbidden. You stare at the ceiling with heroic self-control. As the room grows darker, sleep starts to settle over the household. But medieval children don't fall asleep freely. They follow more rules. Rule 4. Don't talk after the adults settle. Whispering is risky. Giggling is fatal. Asking questions is unthinkable. Historians still argue whether medieval families followed rigid bedtime silence, or whether kids chatted quietly until adults shushed them. Written sources lean towards strict quiet. Oral accounts hint at more warmth. Your household is somewhere in the middle. Quiet, but not joyless. Just when you start to drift off, your grandmother begins her nightly ritual. Soft, muttered prayers that blend into the ambient crackle of the fire. You don't know half the words, but the cadence soothes you. "Sleep well," she whispers at the end. Not to any one person, just to the room. Your eyes grow heavy, but not before the last rule of the night. Rule 5. Do not leave your sleeping place without permission. Not for water, not for noise outside, not for fear, not even for the lure of moonlight. Outside is danger. Inside is safety. The latch is closed for a reason. You close your eyes, nestling into the warmth beside your sibling. The blanket scratches your cheek, but you're too tired to care. Someone shifts on the floor, someone else sighs, the room breathes together like one slow animal settling into slumber, and finally you drift off, wrapped in the rules, the warmth, and the soft, smoky cocoon of medieval nighttime. Your dreams are simple, your body is tired, your world is small but secure. For now, sleep claims you gently, and tomorrow the rules begin again. You wake before the sun, not because you're well rested, no medieval child has ever been well rested, but because the house itself wakes you. Someone shifts, someone coughs, someone's elbow nudges your spine. The dog shakes off the night with a full-body tremor that rattles the floorboards, and suddenly you're blinking into the faint grey of dawn. There's no snoozing, no 5 more minutes, no drifting in and out of sleep under cosy blankets. Morning is a command, not an option, and with morning comes the next unwritten rule of medieval childhood. You start preparing for adulthood long before adulthood starts preparing for you. A mainstream historical fact sets the tone. Medieval children transitioned into adult roles surprisingly early, often around age 12, sometimes younger. There wasn't a clear line between childhood and adulthood. It was more like a slow slide, a merging of expectations, a gradual accumulation of responsibility until one day, without ceremony, you were simply considered grown. You're not there yet, but you're already being trained. The moment the house stirs, You're expected to help. You fold your blanket, shake out the straw bits. Careful not to spread them around. There's a rule for that too. And get dressed in clothes that stubbornly refuse to cooperate with your sleep-stiff limbs. Your mother hands you a wooden scoop. You're helping with breakfast, which means you're stirring pottage, the breakfast of champions, peasants, and children who don't know what sweetness tastes like. The pot bubbles like a mud puddle having feelings. You stir slowly, carefully, because scorching the bottom is a punishable offence that earns you 2 hours of pot scrubbing. As you stir, your parents talk about the day's tasks: a new fence post, 2 sick goats, the thatch needing repair after last night's wind. Maybe a messenger coming from the manor. You listen in silence, absorbing each task like you're learning a language, because you are, the language of adulthood. After breakfast, you're sent outside with a job that feels small but isn't. Collect soft twigs for kindling and hard sticks for repair work. Not just any twigs, not random sticks, ones that actually serve a purpose. Medieval chores are basically a never-ending scavenger hunt with consequences. As you work, older children trail behind adults, helping with real tasks, carrying tools, fetching nails, assisting with livestock. You watch them with awe. They look older, taller, somehow wiser, and you know that in a few years, maybe fewer, you'll be expected to move like them, work like them, think like them. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. In some medieval communities, children were trained early in tasks that matched their future roles. Girls learning textile and household skills, boys learning fieldwork or crafts, though plenty of overlap existed depending on family needs. You've already started your slow march toward that future. You carry your bundle of sticks to the yard, and your father stops you with a single raised hand. "Show me." You freeze. Is this a test? It feels like a test. He inspects each stick, weighing it, bending it, judging it like a master craftsman evaluating a precious offering. He nods at some, rejects others, hands you 2 pieces back. "These won't burn well," he says, "and this one is rotten." There's no anger, just correction, just learning. You nod, more serious than you've ever felt in your life, and trot back to find replacements. Historians still argue whether medieval parents were strict or affectionate, distant or involved. The truth is complicated. They couldn't afford modern softness, but they cared deeply, in the practical, grounding way of people who rely on their children to survive. Later in the morning, your father shows you how to wrap a rope around bundles of brushwood. His hands move quickly, yours follow clumsily. He corrects your grip, shows you how to tuck the ends, makes you do it again. Not because he's impatient, but because this matters. Because someday, you'll need to know. A neighbour asks your mother for help spinning, and you watch as she works the spindle, a slow, hypnotic dance of hands and thread. She lets you try. Your attempt produces something that looks like wounded yarn. She smiles anyway. "Keep practicing," she says, and you do. Between tasks, older kids teach you things adults forget to mention. How to judge weather by the smell of the wind. How to tell when a sheep is upset. Hint, always. How to dry herbs without ruining them. How to balance a yoke without bruising your shoulders. How to politely refuse extra chores using strategic timing. You're learning to belong in a world that expects competence, long before it expects adulthood. At midday, you learn something new. Carrying messages. Your mother hands you a folded scrap of parchment to deliver across the village. Your heart races. Messenger duty is a big deal. It means someone trusts you to remember the route, the instructions, and the fact that dropping or losing the note would be a catastrophe of legendary proportions. You hold the message like it's a sacred relic and walk the path with solemn concentration. Adults greet you. You bow correctly. You do not run. You do not detour. You do not peek at the message, though the temptation is immense. You deliver it safely. The receiving adult pats your shoulder. You glow with pride. Then, as if scripted, the final lesson of the day arrives. While helping your father mend the goat pen, he suddenly steps back, looks at you and says, "Soon, you'll be doing this without me." There's no ceremony, no applause, just a simple sentence, and it lands differently than anything else today. Because medieval childhood doesn't have a clear milestone where you become grown. There is no birthday celebration, no rite of passage marked on a calendar. Adulthood arrives quietly, gradually, like dawn creeping across the floorboards. You feel a shift inside you, small, Subtle, but real. You're not grown yet, but you're growing, training, learning, preparing. When evening comes and you step back inside the house, soot on your hands and straw clinging to your tunic, you realize something. Every rule you've followed, every chore, every bow, every crumb saved, every whispered superstition, every tool held, every careful step, isn't just about obedience. It's about preparing you to take your place in this world, to carry it, to contribute to it, to inherit it, slowly, quietly, unceremoniously. You're becoming someone the village can rely on. And you hardly noticed it happening. You don't remember when childhood officially slipped away from you. No single dawn, no ceremonial moment, no dramatic speech from an elder announcing, "You're grown now." Instead, it happens the medieval way. Quietly, gradually, like mist lifting from a field. One day you wake up and realize the rules that once constrained you have simply stopped being rules. Not because they vanished, but because you've grown into them. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Medieval childhood didn't end at a set age. It dissolved into adulthood as soon as you were considered useful, responsible, and capable. 12, 14, sometimes younger, sometimes older. The line was blurry. Families, not calendars, decided. And as you rise with the pale morning light, stretching limbs that feel longer than they used to, you sense that something in the household has shifted. No one tells you to hurry. No one checks whether your tunic is straight. No one corrects your greeting when a neighbour passes. No one reminds you not to wander. It isn't because the rules have disappeared. It's because you're expected to know them now, to carry them quietly, instinctively, like every adult around you. You step outside, and the village feels familiar in a new way. The lanes you once navigated with caution are simply roads now. The forbidden spaces remain forbidden, but you no longer need constant reminders. You've become someone who understands boundaries without being told. When a dog darts across your path, you don't squeal or jump. You whistle softly, guiding it back toward its owner. When a group of younger children chases a chicken dangerously close to the pig pen, you intervene with the kind of calm authority older kids once used on you. And just like that, you've joined the next tier of the unspoken hierarchy. Children pause when you pass. They dip their heads. They adjust their cloaks. They wait for your direction. It's surreal. You think back to the countless rules that defined your childhood. Don't speak first. Don't waste crumbs. Don't step near the well. Don't wander after dusk. Don't upset the goose. You thought the rules were chains, but now you realize they were scaffolding. You noticed the little ones watching you, mimicking you, measuring their behavior against yours, the same way you once watched older children, wide-eyed, confused, wanting to learn the rhythm of the world. You're still young, of course you are. There's much left to learn, much left to do. But you've crossed into a space where your presence carries weight instead of requiring constant supervision. Your mother asks you to take charge of the smaller siblings while she works the hearth. She hands you a task, simple yet meaningful. Keep them busy, keep them safe. You remember being told the same thing by older children years ago. You copy what they once did to you, assigning harmless chores, teaching simple knots, demonstrating how to collect eggs safely, explaining which paths are off limits and why. One tiny child tries to wander toward the pig path. You intercept her gently. She looks up at you with the same mix of trust and fear respect you once directed toward older kids. It doesn't feel strange. It feels right. Historians still argue whether medieval children felt robbed of youth or simply accepted their early responsibilities as normal. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. But for you, growing up feels less like losing something and more like stepping into shoes that have been waiting by the hearth your whole life. Later that afternoon, the carpenter waves you over, not as a helper, but as someone ready to learn more advanced work. He hands you a tool without hesitation, without hovering, without the protective caution of earlier years. Try this, he says. Not watch, not sweep, not careful now. Try. That single word carries more pride than any lesson you've learned before. You work beside him, matching his pace. Your strokes are careful but confident. The wood takes shape under your hands, not perfect but promising. He watches, nods, and returns to his own task, trusting you to continue without supervision. You feel your chest swell, not with arrogance, but with belonging. By evening, after helping with mending, carrying buckets, and guiding little ones away from the well for the 100th time, you sit outside the house for a moment, watching the sunset drape the village in gold. You're not an adult yet. But childhood has loosened its hold. The rules that once pressed on you now sit lightly. Habits, instincts, quiet knowledge guiding each step. You live them without thinking. How to bow, how to wait your turn, how to carry yourself in company, how to work, how to listen, how to belong. And as the day shifts toward night and the lamps flicker to life inside the house, you realize something gentle and strange. Childhood didn't end. It simply blended into the person you've become. The rules didn't disappear. They became yours. And now, as the medieval world settles into darkness, let yourself soften too. The day's responsibilities fade like distant footsteps along a quiet lane. The rules, once sharp and structured, blur into a warm hum, familiar, gentle, something your mind no longer needs to hold tightly. Imagine the faint glow of the hearth, the soft murmur of voices winding down, the slow crackle of wood settling into embers, the deep, steady breathing of a household at rest. Your body grows heavier, like straw in a winter mattress finding its shape beneath you. The quiet of the medieval night stretches outward, not empty, but peaceful, still, safe. A kind of hush that settles over the world when all work is done and nothing more is expected of you. The air cools, but your blanket is warm. The walls creak, but softly. Someone shifts nearby. Someone sighs. Someone hums a fragment of a tune older than memory. Let that sound guide you downward. Slower now. Softer now. Your breath deepens. Your thoughts drift like feathers. You picture the village fading into moonlight, its rules turning to mist, its paths dissolving into quiet. You no longer need to follow anything. You no longer carry chores or lessons or expectations. Everything becomes gentle, uncomplicated, distant, just the glow of the hearth, just the hush of night, just your body sinking deeper into rest. And as your mind settles into that calm, steady rhythm, the only rule left is this: let go, drift, rest. Sleep comes for you like a warm cloak, and you are ready.